Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1211 Under Pressure. Off, off with their heads, dance, dance till your dead heads will roll, heads will roll, heads will roll. On the floor. The sound of drumming echoed, as the roots started attacking the barrier again. They didn't have the time to be shocked for long, as the song became faster and stronger, prompting the tree to restart its attacks, adding new enemies to the roster of dangers they had to face. The Golden Giant, the Titan, and the Absurdity were rushing at the barrier, giant fists adding to pressure on Krista. Even when the barrier was a legendary skill, there already was a giant legend trying to crush it. They couldn't afford to let those three giant beasts attack too. Cleave. Unbothered by the roots surrounding the barrier, the Minotaur appeared at the barrier and attacked directly with his giant labrys. The attack didn't compare to the earlier energy blade, but it carried the same unholy attribute, leaving spider webs of dark cracks on the barrier that only recovered slowly. Someone stop that dumb bull first. Krista, the benign, exclaimed angrily, as she barely managed to stop the damage from the attack and that of the strike to merge. If the cracks connected, she feared the unholy energy may spread. If that ox keeps adding more, I might not be able to keep up the barrier. I'm sorry. We are having a hard time resisting the urge to dance and chant at the same time, the leader of her own mage squad apologized in panic, sweat dripping from his forehead. His whole body was twitching, as he tried to focus and chant the spell. Members of all parties had now started outright dancing, with their limbs flying everywhere in a choreographed dance, like puppets on strings. It was hard to get any kind of organization back into the different squads the legends brought along. Maybe Krista could have done something against the dancing, but she was currently the only one stopping everyone beside them from being devoured by the tree. Sharing glances, Sodi and the other legends decided on their next moves in moments. Death Claw. A transparent shadow was fired from Jarvan's claw weapon, chasing the Minotaur, who had retreated between the roots. The wooden tentacles smashing into the barrier were cut just above the ground, not even slowing down the blade's energy. The bull had nowhere to run. But when the blade was about to bisect him, it suddenly crashed into a shield of golden light surrounding the bull man. Sparks were flying for a moment before the golden barrier was shattered in 2 steps. The Minotaur was thrown back by the explosion of the double-layered barrier and escaped the fate of living in 2 halves. Haha, did you think you could kill anyone with the great me and my little brother around? A haughty voice boasted over the music still playing. Weren't they underestimating them a little too much? The elven archer thought with a smirk as her skill finished charging. She let her arrow loose in the middle of the creature's sentence. Cooking ass. Make it fast. The music halted when Sodi set her arrow loose. It had vanished after leaving the bow and appeared directly before the bard in heavy armor without losing any time traveling the distance. The projectile struck the thin barrier covering his armor, crushed it, and hit his neck. Ding! Your skill ownerless blade allowed you to dodge the reflected damage. The arrow had hit the hidden gorget that protected the bard's neck and disintegrated under the reflected damage it had to take because it couldn't be reflected onto the attacker. Despite this, she suddenly felt incredibly sick. Her body felt weak and she tumbled. Ding! You have been affected by Disiphane's mirror and contracted disease. A skill effect that affected her? She felt like the world was turning and her head was burning up. One moment to the other she had a high fever, her vision turned blurry, and chills shook her body. Her status window was filled with various ailments. The elf knelt down on the street, afraid to fall from the vertigo. How long had it been since he had felt this sick? Centuries. Never since she became a legend. The music had stopped, but she suffered the price. Outside of Delta. Peering through the portal in the sky above Delta, Nadina watched the situation unfold. Although she clenched her fist tightly, holding herself back upon seeing the hateful bard finally appear on the scene, she couldn't help but gloat at other people's misfortune. She already expected their struggle, knowing that even Kalsmir had struggled to harm the tree with his breath. Without her distracting Minas Mar, they had actually assembled their forces on the legends, just as she expected. Her smile grew even wider at the other situation. Nadina had not expected that a hidden figure would manage to set up 2 more gates, but seeing them fleeing through the gates and being captured by the natives was a welcome surprise. When she realized that the other side beyond the gates was also struggling to keep the tree from invading their world, she almost cheered for her enemies. After all, if there was someone she hated more than the bard, then it was those conservative royals, especially Byron, that son of a bitch. Nadina had no hard time recognizing some of the legends that appeared, especially Sodi was a household name for the Byron royal family. That old bastard actually tried to set her up, they only deserved to lose his territory to that tree. He could all go and suck it. It would be best if he just went ahead and died there. She would have a perfect excuse for all the things that went wrong on this expedition. Obviously someone was sabotaging her, so she couldn't be held fully accountable for the losses she incurred on the way here. Who could prove her wrong? Byron? Who would believe him? His legends were all here, and they were actually struggling. Right now, the legends were locked in a battle against Mars creations. 4 legends were being besieged by 2 extremely powerful legends and several supermassive beings. The Fire Titan also came as a surprise to the Chosen of Kali. She really had not expected to see even more high-caliber monsters to come out of Mars. If she was lucky, the invaders would be able to take down some of them, making her job easier. It was a shame they managed to assemble before Mars attacked. Without Krista's shield, they wouldn't have lasted this long. Things became chaotic when the archer's arrows shut off the music. Although Sodi seemed weakened, they started their counterattack with their parties able to move freely again. Krista's mages pelted the golden giant in powerful magic to keep it at bay. Warriors and tanks of all parties, strengthened by the priests of Kuvdite and Krista, were defending against and pruning the roots that were attacking the shield, ensuring their survival. Leaving the position to their parties and the parties to Krista, the other 3 legends finally made their move. Nadina clicked her tongue, but it was to be expected that just the roots of the tree were no great danger to the legends themselves. Before, they just had a hard time defending their party and attacking the tree simultaneously. While it seemed like Jarvan entered the jungle of roots to kill the bull that kept putting cracks into Krista's barrier, Demis rose to the sky, stepping on the backs of small golden cupids that appeared below his feet. The bishop went off the offense against the lightning bird. It seemed like Sodi, despite her obvious weakness, was also about to attack, but Nadina's attention was cramped by a different part of Delta. If she remembered correctly, this was the demon district, where the demons should have invaded to raise the city. She frowned, thinking of the demonic incompetence. She found 2 figures fighting in this place, away from the main attraction. P.S. I hope accounts that sell posts and are the cause of this stupid setting go fucking bankrupt. Chapter 1212 Calm Mountain, Scary Mountain. Young friend, just surrender yourself. I don't wish to harm you any further, the old man said in a warm friendly voice, completely contradicting the vicious fighting style he had shown so far. Vermeer was looking at him, panting heavily. Blood flowing from a deep cut on his forehead drenched his fur and blocked the vision in his right eye. The only sensation he felt from his right arm was pain. Shivers ran down his spine when he looked at it. The limb was completely twisted, and his bones were completely crushed. It was no better than meat hanging off his right shoulder. The worst part was that it had happened in an instant and he didn't even know how the old man did it. The lycanthrope had attacked him when he realized that his stealth no longer worked on the man. At first, he simply kept dodging his claws. He now realized that he had led him here, into a crater at the edge of the city. When they were here, things changed in an instant. One moment he was executing a skill, the next his arm was left as a piece of minced meat, barely connected to his body. Such a terrifying and brutal attack, performed before he, a legend, could even react. Young friend, I understand your unwillingness, but I am a bad match for you. You should simply surrender. Maybe the man was genuine, but all his words felt condescending to Vermeer. Oh really? We will see about that, the lycanthrope growled and chucked a unique healing potion, fixing his arm instantly. Of course, the wolf understood that there were differences even if one succeeded on the path to legend. In a fight, a legend focused on combat would have the upper hand, compared to a hunter like him, but he also had his pride. He became a legend on his own. He didn't have a royal, or organization to sponsor him. He had worked hard, even when his path was not the most prestigious. He knew that he was a legend, focused on preying on the weak, but so what? I'm a legend, too. Damn it, he exclaimed, pulling out his only legendary item. The bone awl was an artifact he had found enshrined in a ruin, and it was the secret to how he managed to become a legend without any support. He threw it and the small bone splinter shot off with incredible speed. The old man in white robes evaded it with ease, but the wolf smirked. Red blood was quickly staining the man's robe, spurting from his shoulder. The bone awl ignored defense and always struck the point the user intended. Of course, using it as a weapon was not its original purpose. An awl was supposed to prepare holes for sewing in materials that were too hard for the needle, like leather. However, Vermeer had managed to perfectly adapt his skills and his fighting style to use the awl as the perfect hunting and assassination weapon. He tried to approach things as a realist, but he definitely wasn't a coward. He would just go down without a fight. Ah, shit, Nadina exclaimed under a bated breath. She was paling against her will. Vermeer, another legend known to work with Lord Byron, had appeared, but just a moment after he became serious, he was left completely wasted. Held by the throat by his enemy, the lycanthrope was little more than a piece of misery. All four of the wolfman's limbs were crushed into bloody pulp, his snout was broken and half his head was dented in. Holding him was a tall, muscular man, with a long white beard. At first, he had seemed like a benign old man, but the moment Vermeer drew blood with his surprise attack, his robes exploded off his body, and before Nadina knew what happened, the situation was like this. What really shocked her wasn't even what happened to the legend, but the view of the benign old man who had turned into a statue of rippling muscles, exposed by his ripped robes, that barely covered the important parts, needed to keep it PG-13. This had to be an immortal. It made no sense that she wouldn't have heard of such a legend. There was someone this strong still hidden in Delta in addition to the tree? She stared at the old man in fascination, when his eyes suddenly moved. Inadvertently, the man had looked up and his piercing eyes seemed to look at her. This was not possible, was it? After a moment of looking her dead in the eye, he turned away, flying toward the tree in the center. Seth had stopped playing the devil's wheel fiddle after being struck by the arrow. He had not suffered any damage thanks to the armor's weapon negation, but he wanted to take a moment to look at the situation. The goal was already reached, there was no need to overdo it now. The bard saw no way for the legends and their parties to still turn this around. On the surface, things seemed to be balanced, but this stalemate was just a war of attrition. Jarvan, the man wielding an interesting pair of claw weapons, was busy chasing their gatekeeper. Asterion managed to survive the pursuit of the legend, thanks to Tetzel and Puffles aiding him with support and cover fire from the sky. Lightning and thunder cracked below the crown of the guardian tree, whenever the Parrot of Doom and the hammer-wielding bishop clashed. Seth couldn't quite see who had the upper hand there, but he doubted both were going all out, otherwise the city would have suffered more damage. That were two legends busy with something else. That left the elf, who was currently suffering the backlash of destroying his shield from the Shield Warrior's constitution, and the priestess who created the barrier that kept the comrades of the legends alive. Originally, Asterion was supposed to create weak points on the barrier to break it, but they had seen through that. The player inside the barrier couldn't be underestimated, their levels were all in the middle and late 100s. If it wasn't for them defending the barrier, the tree, Hellion, Heads, and the Draconic Fire Titan would have probably crushed it by now. This was good. If they wanted to lure Nadina back in, they had to make it look as balanced as possible, only then he could give the horsemen the entrance they deserved. As he was thinking about this, a second figure joined him on the branch he stood on. Seth furrowed his brows for a moment before he recognized who it was, that had appeared holding a mutilated torso in their hands. You? What are you doing here? Didn't you return with Xiangpeng? The blacksmith asked surprised. Master Mountain had left Earth with the master of the Soaring Eagle sect to deal with the aftermath of the sect alliance's attack after the Great Tournament. The cultivator had also intended to look for more allies, together with Xiangpeng. Ultimately they intended to create a pro-Earth faction on the voracious Cloud Continent, which was why Seth had not expected the old man to return any time soon. His change in appearance, or rather the reveal of a body rippling with muscles, had not helped Seth recognize him at first. I reached Mount Agra yesterday and heard of the situation here, so I hurried over, the cultivator explained with a friendly smile. When I reached Delta and scanned it with my consciousness, I found traces of a powerful being moving while hiding, so I caught this guy first, he explained when he noticed Seth's gaze at the beaten figure in his hands. Wait, was this guy a legend? Seth asked shocked. Having a legend sneaking around Delta was one worrying thing, but the fact that Master Mountain had crushed them without anyone even noticing that there was a fight, meant that Seth had severely underestimated Yu's power. I don't quite know. He definitely was comparable to a pseudo-immortal or someone in the early stages. He managed to scratch me when I tried to capture him gently, Yu explained, shocking the blacksmith even more. Maybe Yu was a stronger ally than he had expected. By the way, do you know a young blonde girl? She was watching my fight by some weird means through the portal up there. I think I might have frightened the little girl a little, he added. Seth stared at him. Did it look like she would run, the bard asked controlled. I don't think she will dare to attack with me here, Master Mountain said proudly, straining Seth's nerves. Why were people constantly ruining the stage? They had put so much effort in crafting the situation, but allies and enemies kept preventing the perfect moment. Now Nadina was even about to run away. Maybe he had put too much effort into this. Maybe there was no perfect moment to epically introduce his creations to the world. He was fed up with it. With a sigh, he took out the communication orb. Change of plans it is. Hoskin, contact Cromwell, Seth instructed. It was no use getting frustrated. He could only fix the situation. They couldn't let her get away. Karina, give Hellion a weapon and please take care of the captive. Let's go. Leaving these words, he had Master Mountain follow him. The half-dead Vermeer was left hanging on the tree. Chapter 1213 The Jungle. Sodi was finally recovering from the disease status, thanks to the support of the various priests from the raid party. Although she felt ill, she roughly knew the situation. The bard was gone and the massive beasts were currently held back by the parties that regained their ability to act. Demis faced the legendary bird and Jarvan was hunting the Minotaur. The bishop didn't need help, but if she could take down the Minotaur's support, the flying centipede, and the Imuji, Jarvan would be able to quickly dispatch the beast and return. With Jarvan here, it would be easy to turn this situation around. At this point, Sodi knew that this was a fruitless struggle. Just to resist and reassemble they were exhausting their resources. Once Demis got rid of the eagle, they would have to make a decision. Try to keep fighting the tree, or retreat through the portal the tree kept open. Resisting the vertigo still left of the symptoms, she looked at the sky. Past the golden giant being blasted by spells, she could see the two beasts giving Jarvan a hard time. They were floating just below the emerald crown of the tree. One was a black Imuji, like a giant serpent with a dragon-like head and four stout, strong legs. The other was a creature she had never seen before. Appraisal called it an Ivysaur. It looked like a giant centipede, even longer than the pseudo-dragon. Its body was covered in a white carapace, smooth like porcelain and covered in golden markings. Its massive golden head resembled a scarab, with the neck shield looking like opened wings. Sodi raised her legendary bow and aimed her death shot at one of the six eyes. This one was the biggest obstacle, so she decided to take it out first. She had knocked the arrow and aimed the shot, but she hesitated when the golden colossus suddenly evaded the magic spells and bent over to the wall of wood, the giant tree trunk that covered her left field of view completely. It had grabbed onto a branch that the elf had not noticed before. No, she would have remembered if it had been there before. It had appeared there. Pressing his other hand against the trunk he started, pulling the branch out. Her jaw fell open when the branch actually moved. As if unsheathing a sword from the tree, the colossus pulled and the branch became longer and longer. The wood emerging from the trunk was smooth, with sharp edges glinting in the sun. Sodi was too busy staring at the colossal wooden sword the giant had just pulled from the trunk, to utter a curse. The colossus took a practiced stance with his new weapon as if declaring himself the king of Delta, after pulling the sword from the tree. The wooden sword had a menacing aura, even when it was just held still. The next moment she heard an incredibly loud sound. It was huge amounts of air, screaming as they were cut apart by the giant blade. With one, terrifyingly quick move, he had swung the sword and blocked most of the spells shot at him. Her heart sank. The spells were already unable to harm the giant before, only able to push him away from the barrier, but now? The colossus took a stance, unmistakably the stance of swordsmanship. The wooden sword in his hand actually began glowing with sword aura. The golden colossus was going to use a skill in addition to sword aura. The barrier was already barely holding up, despite their best efforts. Sodi looked to Krista, who was staring at the attack, too. Her gaze told the elf all she needed to know. If that attack landed, in addition to the trees, the fire titans, and the abomination's pressure, it would break. Shit! We have to get away from here, the elf exclaimed. What are you saying? Krista asked incredulously. Her pleading gaze turned accusatory. Jay, just shoot it. Kill the colossus, the support urged her, but Sodi couldn't comply with her request. If she could, she would have done so already. But she didn't have the time to explain why shooting the colossus would not solve their problem. Sodi's Elven Scout's Eyes, legendary, was a skill that allowed her to instantly grasp the weaknesses of her opponent and judge the likelihood of a decisive attack. The problem was that she could see no vitals on the colossus. She could see some weak points, but even if she severed a leg and showed the Colossus in arrows, nothing could stop that next attack. Under Krista's and the raid party's shocked expression, Sodi turned away from the Colossus and let her arrow loose. Flying through the air, the one arrow began multiplying over and the massive barge that had even taken a chunk out of the tree trunk rained on and into the portal behind them. Everyone through the gate, quickly. Aiden, get them through the gate, she commanded the tank of her party directly. What about Jarvan? Our bishop is still fighting, voices of dissent came from the raid party, but the decision was made. The elf had not thought that she would be forced to make this decision this early, but if they stayed, the raid party would be wiped out. She didn't really care for the order of Kevdite, or Jarvan, but she was not ready to sacrifice her party in this battle. As the last arrow passed the gate's horizon, the wooden sword began moving. It was a mighty swing, straight from above, as if the barrier was a watermelon he wanted to split. Seeing this, she knew there was no time for hesitation. Ignoring those who still didn't move, she grabbed her mage and priest who were still running toward the gate, and passed through herself. Before her appeared the familiar plane that surrounded the world column. Earlier, 8 armies with 15,000 high-level players each, had stood here in orderly rows to invade Delta once they secured the landing zones. Now there were only the people that passed the gate before her in sight. Saying the landscape had changed was an understatement. Sodi's barrage of arrows had torn a hole into the thicket of roots and vines that covered the plain like a jungle. The people before her were staring upward toward the gate behind her. Following their gaze, she had to do a second take, questioning whether they really left Delta, when she saw the same emerald crown covering the sky. Atop the world column stood the same tree they had just run from. Maybe it was a little smaller, but it was a huge fucking tree, sitting right on top of the column hewn from a small mountain. But the tree couldn't compare to the shock she felt when she looked into the crown. So this was why they called it the hanging tree, she thought to herself in horror, witnessing hundreds or thousands of figures, hanging from the branches of the giant vegetation. The sight was especially bad for her because she could see all the details, unlike her companions. All the people hanging from the branches, with nooses of vines, were still alive, they looked like mummies, struggling, as their life force was slowly and constantly drained, as if they were just some small mana stone used to replenish power. No wonder the tree was endlessly regeneration on their side. Here he had thousands of high-level players to draw power from, what about other places? Fighting the guardian tree was worse than fighting a hydra. Who knew how many heads the tree had? How many stomachs were there, supplying it with unending amounts of power? The realization struck her harder than anything so far. They were just a joke. Them thinking they could beat the tree, was like a bunch of brats believing they could slay a real dragon with the funny, little sticks and wooden shields. Now, this thing had a foot in the door, literally. Run, 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 she started shouting over and over, shouting at the people that came to this side. The gap she had created with her skill started closing and the roots surrounding them began stretching for their lives, too. Everyone started running, and the next moment a paladin of Kevdite, who judged his life to be worth something, was suddenly struck. The holy shield negated the attack, but he was catapulted forward, rolling across the ground. It's the vines. Be careful of attacks from above. The elf shouted when she processed what just happened. Looking up and back toward the tree, she saw a few more figures making it through the gate. Several of them were immediately snatched up by the vines. Run, Krista, the elf shouted at the legend who was among the ones that fled. She shot several arrows to cut off the caught members, but couldn't help all of them. She wanted to give Krista better cover fire, but she also had to get her own people to safety. Leaving it up to the stragglers to follow, they took the lead, to cut a way out of the thicket. Chapter 1214 Not Cromwell's Forte. Outside of Delta. Who would have thought this would be all I end up doing? Cromwell thought in derision, setting up the last part of a wide formation, surrounding a valley in the vicinity of Delta. At the bottom of the valley, the remnants of Spacia's army were camping, at the edge of a massive gate. This was Nadina's camp, they had set up after their odyssey. With plans constantly changing, Cromwell had not expected they would end up returning here to set up an ambush. Apparently, the probability that Spacia might just retreat was high. Nobody could stop them from running away if they used home call. That was if they were able to use the system skill. Although setting up space locks was not Cromwell's forte, that didn't mean the researcher had not learned how to use them. It's done, should I activate it? He contacted the blacksmith and asked, after fixing the last focus of the array. Although it was a rough setup, the scientist was confident in its functionality. Activate it. We will be there shortly. Nadina was hesitant to leave. The old man was just one legend, but her instincts told her that he was bad news. Yet, she couldn't run. What would the imperial family think if she simply retreated at this point because of a vague feeling? She still had 3 legends with her and there were still 2 fighting in the city. Although she had not been able to see much of the fight through the thick foliage at the foot of the tree, she knew that things had taken a turn for the worse. Any other time, she would have felt gratified to be right and see the people who tried to steal her achievements get decimated, but the gaze of that old man had disturbed her. She would have already left if she didn't know what people would say. Objectively, this was the perfect time to attack. There were 2 legends keeping the enemy distracted. The Chosen of Kali could take her legends and undead army and raid the enemy's main base. Even if she didn't take down the tree, destroying Mina Marhir would be enough of a victory to save her face in the Empire. Unable to make a decision, she prepared for either. She told the soldiers to get ready to leave while she kept an eye on the situation in Delta. The old man had vanished under the tree together with Vermeer and she had not seen him again. Should she attack and risk it? She doubted the man could win against Kalsmere, but she wasn't afraid of her undead losing. If she was honest with herself, it was the first time she feared for her own life. If the old man aimed for her instead of the skeleton dragon, she didn't believe she stood a chance. Not after seeing what happened to the lycanthrope. As she was observing the district with rapt attention, the portal suddenly flickered. Her heart dropped straight down to her undergarment, seeing a sign of static in the supermassive portal. This was a pathway created by a legendary artifact given to her by the imperial family. It wasn't supposed to just flicker out of nowhere. Urgently, she lifted her gaze and hectically looked around, only to realize that all the smaller portals used to send out her troops had closed. All but the legendary gate had vanished. She froze. There was only one possibility for this to happen. Someone had deployed a spatial lock in the area. Use home call. Hurry, she commanded decisively. Most spatial locking formations couldn't block the system skill or needed time before they could, however. Ding! You currently can't use home call. The service in your region is not working. Please try again at a later time. Just like her own attempt, nobody succeeded in using home call. They were stuck here. As the roughly 3,000 soldiers left of her expedition force were in various states of confusion, the ground started vibrating. Covering the hills and valleys, every inch of ground was suddenly covered by a flood of undead meat gushing over the surrounding ridges. Zombies, skeletons, abominations, giant insects, and undead beasts were mindlessly rushing down toward the camp. Hidden in the crowd were also higher-ranking undead like Death Knights and zombie warriors. A creature resembling a giant baboon jumped out from the mass, crashing into the camp's shield like a meteor. It actually managed to cling to the shield membrane and started bashing its fists against it while letting out psychotic roars. This thing was at least on the level of a Doom Knight. More beasts jumped at the barrier, covering the dome in bodies that frantically tried to break it. Nadina had experienced this often enough to immediately recognize Earth as weird zombies. However, their numbers were incomparable to before. There were thousands, no tens of thousands. Even more than she could ever dream of assembling in her own army. What are you doing? She barked, her voice enhanced with magic. Get in formation and defend the barrier, she commanded the soldiers, as she summoned her liches, to meet the untiring flood with her own. Ding! You have witnessed Pyotr Sokolov, the Undying Elder. All your mental attributes temporarily increased by 15 in his presence. Frustrated, she chose to call out Pyotr. Kalsmere could have handled this army with a few breaths, but with the living imperial soldiers at her side, she couldn't use that. They would die even quicker to the putrid miasma than these infected corpses. Pyotr, get rid of this flood, she commanded the lich. People may believe that a lich was not the best candidate to fight undead, as the enemy had a high resistance to necromancy and curses. But this was not necessarily the case. Although Sokolov was a legendary lich now, in his life he was an elemental archmage close to reaching the legendary status. He finally became a legend shortly before death, but it couldn't save his life. He turned to dark magic and necromancy because of a disease cutting his life short. Now he not only possessed the battle magic from when he was alive, he also knew most of the enemy's weak points. The half-skeleton nodded and began casting. Giant, green fireballs kept forming, dropping from the sky in quick succession. Where they hit among the undead, they didn't explode but splatter. As if the fire was a viscous liquid, it splattered everywhere and stuck to the corpses rushing toward the bottom of the valley. Green flames quickly started spreading, burning whatever they hit relentlessly. It was a spell specialized to deal with these zombies that were able to regenerate. The fire was cursed and would not stop spreading and burning until nothing was left of the one it hit. The bulk of the enemy army quickly wilted away while they were still charging at the barrier, but not all. The stronger ones just endured it and continued to attack, burning like green torches. Yet, although they were a little troublesome, once a legend was involved, these zombies were nothing. However, this was just the advance party. They had to get away. If that old man appeared, Nadina truly feared for her life. Her thought raced, when her eyes fell on the artifact portal. It worked despite the spatial lock. On the other side was the airspace of Delta. The camp was covered in a formation that blocked their escape, but the district wasn't. If they ran into the gate, they would fall toward Delta, but they would be free to use home calls. Retreat into the gate. Use home call when you reach the other side, the necromancer cried out, urging the remaining soldiers to flee forward. Advancing on Delta was their only way out. It was at this moment when she heard a faint beat, like the marching of boots echoing in the mountains. Ding! You are listening to Deities of War. All your combat-related stats are lowered by 20%. You feel an ominous presence watching you. Chapter 1215 Get out of here. It felt as if everything had halted. The burning zombies stopped attacking, and the soldier, who had run for the gate, stood still. Nadina's heard her own ragged breathing. It was as if the world had halted for just a moment, to listen. Down from the sky. Into the fight a voice erupted into the silence of this still world. It was a quiet voice in a language Nadina didn't know, yet understood the meaning of. Her gaze trailed to the skies above, in the direction of Delta. Hearts full of rage, full of thunder and glory. The heaven above them actually darkened with clouds, as if a storm front approached from the direction of Delta. The burning meat sacks began moving again, with reignited vigor. Swords in the wind crossing the sky. A group of small figures appeared in the far distance. Nadina shook her head. Seeing the undead move again, she forced herself to escape the weird state she was in. It had only been moments since the beat began, but it felt like minutes. What are you all waiting for? Get out of here, evacuate through the portal. You are just in the way, Nadina finally barked her command, ripping the soldiers out of their stupor. How was she supposed to fight properly, when she had to look out for all this luggage? Lords of Doom, bring an end to your story. The cry of a melody erupted among the mountain, shaking the very bedrock they stood on, as the figures got closer. The chosen of Kali could feel her knees weaken under the vibration and suppression of the music. The figures were close enough to make them out. There were 5 figures in the front, 1 riding a griffin, 3 riding horses, and 1 riding what looked like a horned beast. The moment she managed to get a closer look, she regretted it immediately, as her heart proceeded to drop down her pants. A knight in dull grey armor, carrying a staff and a shield. The armor looked menacing, giving off a feeling of dread. The knight rode a metallic horse covered in almost fluffy-looking frost and left a trail of snow in the sky. Ding! You have witnessed Wolfram, the horseman of conquest. Your resistance lowered by 15%. The effect of all crowd control effects and status ailment is doubled in his presence. A knight bursting with flames, parts of his armor looked black, but many parts were glowing red and yellow from the heat. He carried the burning blade of a sword without a hilt and rode a metallic horse, bursting with pure crimson flames, leaving a trail of fire and smoke in the air. Ding! You have witnessed Basilith, the horseman of war. Your defense is lowered by 15%. All damages you receive are doubled in his presence. An automaton resembling a knight in heavy armor made of a crimson material with red markings. Compared to the others, it was slimmer and sleek in design, a fusion of armor and golem. In its hands it carried a frightening contraption, which resembled a staff, fashioned with a boat hook at one end, and 3 chains that ended in vicious hooks at the other end. This one rode a stag, which looked like it was carved from black crystal, except for the silver antlers on its forehead. The stag left a trail of water droplets on its path. Ding! You have witnessed Strix, the horseman of hunger. Your resistance to draining effects is lowered by 15%. All resource consumption is doubled in his presence. Nadina immediately recognized the last one, as she remembered her jealousy for the mount. The 4th horseman rose a pale white nightmare. It was a knight as black as darkness itself, emitting the aura of death from his armor that looked like black crystal. He carried no weapon, except the horde of undead surrounding the camp. Ding! You have witnessed Hoskin, the horseman of death. Your maximum health is lowered by 15%. Resurrection is impossible in his presence. It becomes harder to control the undead. She immediately felt the effects of the horseman of death. First, she felt sick all of a sudden as her health dropped to 850/1000. Then the threshold of the control stat needed to control her undead rose sharply. It felt like a 20 to 25% increase in requirement. Nadina shivered as the realization hit, that Minasmar had been hiding 4 more legends. What would have happened if her original plan succeeded? At that time she would not only have faced the tree, but these 4, too, and maybe the old man on top. She looked around. At her command, the living members of her army got back in motion, sprinting toward the massive gate. They were just humanoids, but their legendary effects were overwhelming. She needed Kalsmere, if only. Ding! You have witnessed the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Fear has taken hold of you. All casting times and cooldowns are increased by 20%. They actually had a set effect, as legends. The horsemen of the apocalypse? Nadina's thoughts came to a grinding halt. Puzzle pieces she had not connected before were now falling into place. The phrase had unlocked a memory like a key. When she became a royal of Spacia, she learned about legends and myths. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse was a myth existing across the patchworks, just like the dragon myth of whom dragon inherited their legendary properties. However, unlike dragons who could actually be encountered, the 4 horsemen were more like a rumor. Their existence was doubted and unproven, as no believable witness reports could ever be found. The point was that she was right now staring at something that was not supposed to exist. Born under the sign of the hammer we stand and here you all may die. Shocked she witnessed what was happening below, past the portal. The soldiers of Spacia had jumped through the gate into the skies above Delta, where they intended to use home call to escape back to their home base. Jump through the gate, fall for a bit and vanish. This was what was supposed to happen, so why was Nadina now watching the people fall and fall? As if in slow motion, she watched on as their faces twisted into expressions of panic and horror, as the system skill didn't activate even past the portal. Their mouths were ripped wide open, screaming cries of panic and fear that could not be heard at this distance, as they vanished into the crown of the tree. Whether the horrific plant devoured them, or their bodies exploded upon hitting the ecosystem didn't matter. Their demise was certain. Blood spilled on the ground, the battle horns sound. Let thy armies die. Over 2/3 of the soldiers had already jumped by the time people at the rim realized that the plan was not working. Nadina watched over 2,000 people jump over the rim of the portal and fall to their deaths like a horde of lemmings. All at her command. Above the music swelled again. Down from the sky. Into the fight. Hearts full of rage, full of thunder and glory. The 4 horsemen literally swooped down from the sky, raising their arms. They were finally coming to get them. 4 legends were diving at the camp. She wanted to summon Kalsmere and Iromold, resist even if it cost her the rest of the soldiers. However. Ding! You have been affected by Ride of the Horseman. You are stunned. Swords in the wind crossing the sky. Lords of Doom bring an end to your story. Was this the end? Tisk, to think even my summoner forgot my existence. Delta. Eidolon Mo stared down at the tree crown below where over 2,000 people had just vanished, finding their end because of his deeds. Although he knew what he was doing, when he created a spatial lock above Delta, he only quite realized it, when it actually happened. This had been his plan. He had theorized that a spatial lock was unable to close this gate, created by a legendary artifact. Maybe it would have been better if he had been wrong. Even when they were soldiers of Spacia, he couldn't help but feel some burden on his mind. Did they deserve to die like this? Shaking his head, he chased away those thoughts. He could still ponder on his actions at a later time, he had something more important to do now. With a serious look, he approached the supermassive gate above Delta. Chapter 1216 City Deployment. Don't just disregard me. Piotr, the legendary lich, reminded them of his existence, as he stabbed his staff into the ground. Rushing out from the tip of his staff were lines of magic, shining a bright blue. They covered the whole valley, swallowing the undead and surrounding mountains in their light. City deployment, the rotten skeleton exclaimed, the sparse, long beard hair waving in the wind of his power, as he showed why one should never underestimate a wizard with preparation time. Rising from the magic circle that resembled a giant snowflake, was a ghostly city. Incorporeal ancient ruins, made of translucent pale energy covered the valley. In a matter of moments, the Lich had erected an ancient necropolis with him being its lord. The camp's shield strengthened, as power collected on the skeletal torso. Nadina found hope again. Although Piotr had shown a sorry state fighting the dragon and the worm in the sky, it was a different case for a battle on the ground. The Lich's legend revolved around his immortal city of undeath, where he reigned over the dead and enslaved the living. Suddenly, 4 voices sounded, singing in unison. Today is the day you die in the fight. None shall remain to pass one more night. As if to answer their choir, the sky was filled with cursed magic directed at the horsemen and their demonic bard. What doubled resource cost? What increased casting time? In this summoned apparition of Sokolov's home ground none of that matter. The effects of the skill nullified their debuffs. His casting time and cooldowns were nullified here, and he was sucking mana from the city, the land, and its newly acquired residents, the zombies of Earth, which wouldn't die even if he sucked them dry over and over. The only drawback of the legendary skill was that it needed time to deploy and the effectiveness depended on the situation. A barrage of unending spells filled the sky, raining down on the 4 horsemen, showing that the current location was favorable. Right, this wasn't the time to hesitate. She looked at the last living soldiers left, less than 1,000. It didn't matter anymore now. Whether they lived or died, she would get in trouble anyway. Her life was more important. Relying on the Elder Lich for cover, Nadina opened her circle of reincarnation and to bring the skeleton dragon and the core worm back out. With 3 legends on her side, one of them being Kalsmere, her chances would be. Choir, now the world's calling us. Seth, immortal. Choir, we are lords of war. Seth, immortal. Choir, we are lords of war. Her thought came to a grinding halt as a figure plowed through the sea of offensive magic with incredible speed as if it was an innocent autumn creek. The aura of menace the rider expelled made the curses and spells surrounding him seem harmless. The horseman of hunger, wielding his baneful weapon, seemed unimpressed by the magic hurled at him. When he reached the barrier over the camp, at the center of the incorporeal city, the automaton slammed the hooked end of its staff against it. It didn't break. There was not even an impact. The mighty bulwark of magical protection just fizzled out. Where the hook touched it, it became paler before completely vanishing, creating a hole with soft, thin edges on their shield, like a vignette framing the rider's arrival. Where Strix passed, the blue city of ancient ruins lost its vigor and color. The black stag charged at Sokolov, so fast that Nadina could only watch, but not react. The horseman swung his staff and the 3 hooks at the end of the chain struck Sokolov's rib cage, taking hold of the Elder Lich. You have been weighed, the rider exclaimed with a terrifying voice, as he lifted the Lich up, using his right hand as the balance point of his scale. As the legend was hoisted up, the vivid mana flowing through his bones and around his body dimmed, as it was absorbed by the vicious hooks, clawed into his torso. Even the ethereal city around them dimmed in this short amount of time. Cursing in her mind, Nadina began casting her skill to support Piotr, but she immediately felt the weight of the legendary presence. What used to feel smooth and easy when casting the skill, now felt like a chore, as if she was chewing sand while casting spells. She could only try and cast as fast as possible, while she was forced to watch in the meantime. You have been measured, the horseman exclaimed, riding a curve, still pulling Sokolov along. At the peak of the curve, uniting the momentum as well as the power behind swinging the weapon, the hook dislodged. Clank clank, with a bell-like, bright sound of chains, the legendary Lich was catapulted into the massive rock face of the valley. The skeleton torso was lodged deeply into the rock of the valley. Nadina had a hard time feeling her connection to the undead. She had to hurry. The stag became slower, coming to a halt. And you have been found wanting, the automaton finished, staring at the Lich, who lacked the strength to move. The horseman had no eyes, but his gaze was filled with an unquenchable thirst. Nadina would have never thought that someone's hunger could be so palpable. Before she could finish her casting, the skeleton dragon and the undead sea serpent had finally exited her cycle. This was her chance, she had to buy time. The automaton was attempting to pull the Lich from the hole in the rock, she had to stop this. Dyromold, stop him, she commanded telepathically, overcoming her shock. Her instincts finally kicked in. She had to fight for her life, struggle and claw her way out to survive. Her undead army flooded from the purple gates and the undead under her summoned more undead. She threw everything she had into the situation. Seth, omens, what are you waiting for? Go join them by their side. Let the 4 horsemen go for a ride. Choir, born under the sign of the hammer we ride and here you all may die. Answering the bard, the other 3 horsemen charged into the valley like a murder of crows. Their blood on the ground, Conquest spoke. Dyromold, who had charged at the horsemen of hunger to save Piotr, was suddenly struck by a bolt of purple lightning, turning part of the desiccated skin atop the bones into a dull metal. The sea serpent halted for a fraction of a second, and then the surface layer of skin that had turned into metal broke off like brittle stone under the force of its motion. However, this gave the horseman just enough time to evade, riding his black stag. While the core worm faced the horsemen of hunger and conquest, the horsemen of war attacked the skeleton dragon. Enduring the debuffs of their legendary aura, Nadina finally managed to finish the casting for her skill Flames of Rebirth, before the next attacks hit. Kalsmir, Dyromold, Piotr, the Liches, the Doom Knights, and every undead under her and every undead under them were clad in purple flames, significantly increasing their powers, and bringing back some of the vigor they possessed in life, as additional strength. However, it also left the necromancer with less than a third of her mana at the same time. The battle horns sound. War continued. The crimson flames of the horseman of war covered the sky, as he released an attack from his blade. The wave of fire washed across Kalsmir, but left no visible damage. Nadina clenched her fist in excitement. She had been shocked by 4 new legends suddenly appearing, but they were all humanoid. Right, facing Kalsmir was for them, comparable to Byron's legends facing the abominable guardian tree. She still had the upper hand. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Acting on pure instinct, she activated the power of Kali. In an instant, 6 arms made of purple energy, each equipped with a different legendary item, blocked a hand clad in glistening black armor. A black knight, clad in the aura of death, oozing from the armor like a dark fog, had reached out his hand for her. The horseman of death had approached from behind, without her even noticing that he was missing from the battle. The empty eye slits of the helmet glowed in a fiendish, dim red. Let thy armies die. Chapter 1217 Auras Galore. Her confidence was blown away in an instant. The death energy emitted by that hand could have ended her here and now. All her ambitions would have ended just like this. The horseman of death had no weapon because he didn't need it. Just the touch was enough to kill someone. The hand had been blocked by a legendary shield, but Nadina didn't need appraisal to see the item's durability dropping quickly. She couldn't face this creature. Although it was not as frightening as the old man, she knew that she would lose in a fight. A scroll appeared in her hand and she crushed it. The scroll of instant transmission allowed her to blink to any place in a radius of 200 m. The location she appeared at was inside Kalsmir. The small pavilion built on the dragon's back was destroyed during the battle with the Colossus, but that was not her destination anyway. Nadina took shelter in the dragon's rib cage. Here, right beside its withered core, they had installed a city-level shield generator, which had already protected the dragon a few times. Although it could shield the whole beast, it was much stronger and safer for her to limit the shield to the rib cage, where she was. She wanted to give a sigh of relief when a notification popped up. Ding! Your summons have been affected by Aura of War. There is a chance of 15% of insubordination and infighting. Ding! You have been affected by Aura of War. Irrational impulses based on outside stimuli are strengthened by 15%. Ding! Your summons have been affected by Aura of Death. Undead have become 20% harder to control. Ding! You have been affected by Aura of Death. Your health regeneration is lowered by 20%. Healing is 20% less effective. Shocked, she looked back at the camp, which was now located below and behind her. The effects on herself she barely noticed, but she had not only felt the strain of the increasing requirements for her subordinates, but also the loss of connections to many of them. In dismay, she watched many of her arduously collected undead kneel to the horsemen of death. 1 out of 10 liches and doom knights bowed their heads, and only 1 out of 10 followed her command to attack the Black Knight. Beyond that, the effects of war were even more visible among her indirect summons. The horde of summoned undead that used to resist Earth's zombies was now embroiled in fighting among themselves, as almost a third of the lower undead turned to attack their allies. The aura obviously affected them even stronger than her. Ding! Your summons have been affected by Aura of Hunger. There is a 15% chance for your subordinates to be overcome by an unquenchable hunger. They will fall into a state of hunger and try to devour anything to fill the void. Ding! You have been affected by Aura of Hunger. All your physical stats are lowered by 10%. There is a 5% chance of falling into a state of hunger. She suddenly felt sluggish and tired, but the scenes unfolding below kept her awake, as she realized that the auras did not differentiate between friend and foe. On both sides, the lower-ranking minions were fighting, and on both sides were units that began trying to devour their comrades and enemies. Like sparks shot from a camping fire, undead jumped out from the barrier and into the crowd, wildly biting around and being devoured themselves. It had not even been 2 seconds since the auras were deployed, but the battlefield had devolved into complete chaos. Although the zombies were burning in Piotr's green fire and her undead glowed in her purple gloom, the only fights with clear sides now were the waves of fire, constantly rocking her shelter, as War tried to fight Kalsmir, Piotr resisting the horsemen of hunger and RoyalRoad dealing with conquest. Death was causing more chaos below, stealing control of her undead. Piotr, empowered by her skill, was now barely holding on against the automaton swinging the hooked staff, by blinking around the ghostly cityscape, and mixing in various spells to buy time. Although the sea serpent's attacks were mostly water, which froze when getting close to the horseman on his freezing steed, Conquest was on the retreat when facing the massive beast. As the situation unfolded, she realized that she might have overreacted. With the core worm and the skeleton dragon, the 4 horsemen might still not be enough to face her. Although it hurt seeing her forces being worn away, as long as she stayed safe in the dragon, she might have a chance of winning. Down from the sky, into the fight. Hearts full of rage, full of thunder and glory. Nadina was about to regain confidence when the grinding lyrics returned. She was suddenly thrown forward. The skeleton dragon that was fighting the horsemen of war was suddenly stopped. Reaching up from the portal on the floor of the valley, was what looked like a golden tower at first. A giant arm, over 100 m long, had stretched from below and its golden hand grabbed onto the hind leg of the dragon skeleton. How was this possible? The artifact was only supposed to work for people associated with Spacia. What was the giant doing here? Had this been their ploy from the start? Had War kept Kalsmir in place, close to the gate, to allow the Colossus to grab it like this? Her thoughts were in chaos, suddenly facing this situation. She couldn't help the myriad of suspicions surfacing in her mind. She had a hard time catching a calm thought since she saw the old man, but the gate being corrupted for enemy purposes was so far outside her expectations, that it felt like the floor was pulled from under her feet. Swords in the wind crossing the sky. A massive ray of light shot up from the gate below, brushing past Kalsmir, while a beam of lightning hit the core worm. The golden colossus, pulling himself out of the portal like a zombie from its grave, was not the only one joining the battle. Beasts of calamity bring an end to your story. Carrying a giant wooden stick, the giant centipede and the emuji appeared from the portal, attacking the skeleton dragon and RoyalRoad. The moment she raised her hopes, she found her advantages being taken away by the power of friendship. The enemy brought reinforcements. Kalsmir. Rise. They couldn't let the necromancer escape. With Eidolon successfully sabotaging the gate, Seth had brought as much as he could. The space mage had even thrown Hellion into the skies of Delta, from his inventory. The Colossus of Rhodes, covered in durable Olympian bronze and shining with holy aura, held onto the giant dragon burning with purple light as he pulled himself from the hole. Since the battle started, the bard concentrated on playing his music, so he could only watch what was happening now. Today is the day they die in the fight. None shall remain to pass one more night. Holding onto the dragon's hind leg with his right hand, Hellion caught the giant branch Puffles and Tatzel brought along. It was the weapon Karina had provided the giant. Driven by biomechanical muscle, the stake was rammed between the lower ribs of the dragon. Using the big stick for leverage, the recreation blessed by Helios pulled himself completely out of the portal, climbing the dragon. The colossal golem's weight pulled the dragon down, allowing Hellion to get solid ground back under his feet, crushing a bunch of ant-sized undead in the process. The skeleton dragon clad in purple flames angrily threw his head around to bite the pesky foe, even trying to blast him with a breath, but the attack of the horsemen of war disrupted the giant beast's balance. Hellion finally let go of the dragon, pulling out the branch he struck the landing and took his stance. It was just a giant, straight piece of wood, but as the massive golden knight took an overhead posture, a fine gleam of white aura mixed with holy power formed on the rough wood surface. It was finally Hellion's chance to show his true potential after fully inheriting 80% of the skills, knowledge, and experience of a knight commander. His movement seemed calm and without haste, despite the speed they were performed. A simple diagonal strike from the upper right to the lower left, across the dragon's behind. For the first time, damage was visible. The simple strike left a deep gash across the dragon's hip, upper leg bone and tail vertebrae. As they said, a true master could even cut with a stick. Today is the day you die in the fight. None shall remain to pass one more night. Chapter 1218 Man's Big Stick. Nadina gasped in shock when she registered the damage Kalsmir suffered despite her legion buff. How could that happen? Kalsmir's bones negated 85% of any incoming damage. The image of the weapon the golem used flashed in her mind. It was gigantic, but barely more than a crude piece of wood, that grew kind of straight. Even if it was grown from high-quality material, how could it deal damage to her dragon? There was still so much damage despite being 85% negated. She couldn't let Kalsmir suffer like that. Dash to the sky. Quickly. Then we only have to deal with the horseman, she commanded the skeleton dragon, who followed her order in silence, or at least tried to, when a bolt of purple lightning hit his horn, turning the surface to brittle, dull metal. What was the horseman of conquest doing here? Ignoring the damage on the rear, she spurred the dragon on to get higher, to escape the golden man's big stick. Feeling the change on the ground, Nadina looked back to realize that she had made the wrong decision. While Hellion, Bazalith and Wolfram had turned to the skeleton dragon, the sea serpent and the elder lich got teamed up on by Puffles, Hoskin, Strix and Tatzel. The Death Knight and the Ivisor were ravaging the weakened elder lich who had suffered from the sneak attack of the hungry automaton. The horseman in question had lost interest in the lich after sucking him dry for the most part and changed his target to Dyromold, who had been fighting Wolfram so far. In addition to Strix, Tatzel had also joined in bullying the core worm. Their strategy was simple but didn't need much communication between the two. Tatzel kept his distance, using his smaller size and agility to distract the core worm and pepper it with magic attacks. Strix, riding the black stag, would go for the cheap shots, ripping into the beast with his scale staff. With the only reason the sea serpent was able to fly in the first place, being magical augmentations to the undead body, Dyromold was much more ponderous and clumsy in the sky, compared to the nightmare centipede and the small rider. Seth felt almost sorry for the beast, being bullied like this. But only almost. As for the lich Strix left behind. Go away, Gloomwort. The Rat King is mine, Puffles snarled at Hoskin, the horseman of death when he attempted to get close to the stunned Piotr. The Ivisor still had a debt to settle with the weakened foe, and he wouldn't let someone else get their hands on him. A massive pillar of light descended from the clouds above. It was the same skill that had wiped out 2 bone dragons and a battalion of undead during the earlier siege. The pillar of power descended onto the dilapidated-looking lich. Aren't you all looking down on this old man a little too much? Tax collection. Pyotr Sokolov hollered, activating a skill and exploding with purple energy, that kept spreading across the ghostly cityscape. A shield of the same color blocked Puffles' attack with ease. It seemed that Sokolov had been driven to become serious, or desperate. His skill no longer differentiated friend and foe. Lower-ranking undead started falling over, dead, the fire of their life and the power of their buff absorbed by the legendary skill. The same happened to those stolen by Hoskin. Even the zombies of Earth fell to the ground, unable to move as any mana and life force they had and regenerated was whisked away by the Elder Lich. In turn, the ruins and buildings of his skill grew more and more corporeal. The Elder Lich stood proudly, his staff pointed to the sky, as he blocked the Ivisor's attack with his shield. Yes, he stood. He was no longer the floating upper body of a skeleton, but the purple glow of the Chosen of Kali had taken the shape of a body. While the massive skeleton dragon and the sea serpent only seemed to be engulfed by purple flames with rough shapes, Sokolov's body had a defined outline. He had become a semi-transparent young man in his prime. Although his body was not rippling with muscles, it was trained and far from the decrepit old man's body one would have expected from the skeleton. This changes nothing, Rat King, Puffles exclaimed, shooting a concentrated ray of golden light from his mandibles. It broke through the large shield but was ultimately blocked by the dense sphere of power surrounding the city lord. Ha ha ha! It is time to repay the humiliation I suffered earlier. Now that I reached my prime, I will squash you under my feet, like the bug you are. Sokolov exclaimed, as huge amounts of mana gathered around him and a flood of senseless syllables left his mouth. Annihilation, he exclaimed after it looked like he went crazy for a moment. All of the mana surrounding him had condensed into a black mass, which now burned away, as he fired a pure white matrix of energy toward Puffles. As it flew, it quickly grew in size, leaving the nightmare centipede little chance to dodge. The Eye-Visor tried to attack it, but his light magic and sun energy were disintegrated the moment they hit the matrix. It seemed like a magic that would not just destroy but eradicate anything in its path. Puffles, for the first time in his life, the Eye-Visor felt a hint of fear. Seth, now the world's calling us. A figure appeared in the path of the matrix. Seated on a pale, predatory horse, the Black Knight appeared between Piotr and Puffles, and a nova of darkness exploded from his body and steed. The pale annihilation matrix and the pure energy of death met only inches away from the horseman. Seth, immortal. The spell that eradicated energy and matter fell short when facing the power of death which demanded the end of everything. Energy and matter would find their end, but this end was always death itself. It was impossible to annihilate the essence of death, as it would only end in death. Unable to even get close to the Eye-Visor or touch the rider, the mighty spell waned away in contact with Hoskin's nova of death. The horseman of death had death in it. Puffles stared at the frightening magic fizzle away in a moment's time. The great being had a hard time coming to terms with the fact that he not only felt true fear but that he also felt relief and a smidgen of gratitude for the golem he had sent away earlier. There was no way he could show this. A great being felt no fear, no. Didn't he this one tell you to leave, Gloomwort? The nightmare centipede snarled to play over the awkwardness he felt. Your wishes hold no meaning to me, Hoskin said emotionless and proceeded to ignore Puffles. His nightmare charged at Piotr, who had already recovered from the shock of seeing his magic dispelled and prepared for the next attack. Just you wait. This one will definitely kill the Rat King first, the Eye-Visor exclaimed, but did not follow after Hoskin. For the Eye-Visor, there was no need to close the distance. Considering the Lich's current power, Puffles decided to use the situation and let the knight buy him some time. Chapter 1219 Threads of the Sun. Blast them, Kalsmir! Nadina ordered the skeleton dragon. Bending back the neck, the giant skeleton released a pitch-black breath straight down into the valley. The valley below was pure chaos and apart from the legend, even her own undead would probably suffer. But it was worth it. The soldiers were already as good as gone and the undead could be replenished. She didn't dare to hope to kill one of the horsemen, but the abyss breath should have been enough to take out the 3 non-legends. That was if it had hit. The billowing smoke of decay was met by a just as big bloom of cursed, crimson fire. The horseman of war had turned into a giant meteor of half-liquid metal, surrounded by a ball of fire, several kilometers in diameter. War, we are lords of war. Hungrily, the unearthly flames fed on the dragon's breath, not allowing it to reach the valley below. The Chosen of Kali watched in shock. She had not expected the tiny horseman to completely block Kalsmir's plague breath. Seth, immortal. The song drew her attention back to the bard, the true target of her conquest. Right, seeing all the obstacles, she almost forgot about the original objective. Now she realized that there was nothing between her and the Tower Master, while the horseman of war was busy fighting the dragon breath. Down from the sky, into the fight. Hearts full of rage, full of thunder and glory, the voice had grown softer, almost melancholic. In the sky, there was only her on the dragon and him, standing on the back of a weird griffin. Right, all the others didn't really matter, as long as she managed to take him out, she would be able to focus on her escape. The tower was not a legend, he was just a bard and a blacksmith. Nadina was confident that she could take him down in a moment's time. Confident enough to leave the safety of the dragon's rib cage. Stepping on purple flame wheels, Nadina charged at the singer standing atop his flying mount. She unleashed all her permanent buffs and skills, using her remaining mana to reach the peak of her power. Swords in the wind, crossing the sky. She heard it before she saw it. It was a terrifying buzzing sound, like a giant storm directly ripping at her ears. Her eyes ripped wide open when she faced the crescent of sword aura that was afire in the sky, aiming at Kalsmir. It was the Golden Colossus. She had stopped thinking of it since the skeleton dragon had left its range of attack, but she was wrong. While the dragon was hovering to release his breath, the oversized sword master used the chance to attack. Fired from the almost 200m long branch, the mighty attack easily pierced the layer of purple fire surrounding the dragon. Unable to evade, deploy the barrier, or receive her commands, Kalsmir received the attack all along his side. Ribs were shattered, the dragon's shoulder blade was cracked, but worst of all, the main blow of the attack hit the left wing and severed it. Nadina's view of reality was shattered, seeing the wing bone shatter under the branch's attack. The plague breath was cut off as the dragon started tilting in the air. At first, it looked painfully slow, like an airship losing pressure, but ultimately, the magic that was used to keep the dragon in the air failed. After staying in the air like a dwindling balloon for fractions of a second, the skeleton dragon plummeted back down into the valley like a meteor. Using Blink, Naden evacuated the falling ship before the dragon impacted directly beside the massive portal, only missing it by a little. Lords of Doom, bring an end to your story. The Eye-Visor stared in shock when he saw the giant skeleton suddenly falling from the sky and crashing not far from him. If something that big fell into his valley, there was nowhere that was not close to it. He was even more startled when he almost messed up the cast of his skill, because of the dragon's fall. The Nightmare Centipede was not the only one. The fight between the Lich and the Rider of Death had also halted for a moment, both staring at the dragon. One looking for his master, the other regaining his wits a lot quicker and attacking the Lich in an unguarded moment. The black gauntlet crashed into the almost solid purple sphere that protected the Lich. It held, for now. Where the aura of death touched the magical barrier, it dimmed and weakened. Even magic decayed, and it was only quickened by Hoskin's presence. Piotr was no idiot, he quickly regained his wits and countered the knight, blasting him across the valley, with a ray of pale white light. Puffles had finished his chant and was just waiting for this opportunity. While the barrier was weakened and the Lich showed an opening after countering Hoskin, the Eye-Visor activated his skill. Threads of the Sun. The Eye-Visor's golden neck shield shone like the sun, catching the rays of daylight. Created from the blinding light, threads of sunlight started to shoot toward the Lich. More and more were layering on the barrier with light speed, catching Sokolov in a cocoon of light. Thread of the Sun was a buff skill, whereby the Eye-Visor used his inherent ability to create tailor materials and turn his own power and daylight into threads of pure sunlight to bless a person. For a normal person, these threads would burn into their skin and become something like a tattoo. This tattoo became a semi-permanent buff. The power depended on the initial skill of the caster and the amount of sunlight imbued into it. In bright sunlight, the buff would strengthen even further as it drew power from the surroundings. The effect would last up to several weeks, depending on the receiver's constitution and environment. Of course, this was when it was used on a normal person. When talking about an undead, this was the greatest curse Puffles could bestow on them. They would be marked by the sun, stricken with a constant burning of pure sunlight and holy power. The Lich had quickly turned into a ball of golden light, and by the time the Eye-Visor finished his skill, the ball collapsed. The barrier that had held against it was dissolved by the holy threads, and now the whole bundle struck Piotr. Gah! What is this? The elder Lich screamed, as pain he had not felt in centuries surged through his body. To him, it would have felt like being bathed in molten metal. For a short moment, the golden ball turned into the shape of a human, like a string puppet or mummy. Accompanied by the skeleton's high-pitched screams, the threads accomplished their purpose. They partially dissipated the Lich's semi-transparent body and melted into his very bones, turning the dark, rotten-looking bones a bright silver. For a normal person, there would have only been a few threads. A few silver markings across their skin, looking like a simple tattoo. For Sokolov, Puffles had shown his generosity and poured enough on him to cover the surface of the undead's body several times. Qah! I will not. When the initial pain was gone, Sokolov regained some of his mind. Purple power bubbled up from the silver bones, but when the clouds above moved just slightly, exposing the Lich to more sunlight, the half-skeleton dove into the shadow with a pitiful screech. Ha, ha, what have you done to me? He cried, panting and enduring the pain. Of course, I offered you the death you deserve the most. Very slow, very painful, the Eye-Visor's 6 eyes glinted with glee, seeing his plan had succeeded. The Lich would slowly be purified, suffering terrible pain, until nothing of it was left. Cruel, the people-melting horseman of death commented monotone. Chapter 1220. Charging forward. Cromwell stared at the scene that just happened in the sky. Maybe he was the only one who truly knew what just occurred, apart from the Tower Master. The dragon had actually suffered a combined attack which resulted in his downfall. The scientist had no intention to belittle the power of the Colossus, but the reason the attack managed to even severe the wind, laid in a purple lightning that struck the wing bone only moments before. Since he was outclassed on this battlefield, he was probably the only one with the idle time to watch all the fights and notice the movement of conquest. The dull grey knight on his freezing steed had pulled back from the fight against the sea serpent and joined the fight against the skeleton dragon. However, he did not directly join the fight and waited for a chance to strike, leading to the people on the battlefield forgetting about him. But Cromwell saw it, the actions that seemed too deliberate to be a makeshift strategy. The horseman of conquest, who had seemingly hidden the true extent of his powers, had actually managed to turn part of the wing bone into brittle, grey metal. Unlike the strong dragon bone, that had resisted most attacks so far, the metal broke almost instantly, when it was struck by the attack of the Colossus. Having his left wing severed, the dragon lost his power of flight and plummeted into the valley, leaving his master in the sky above. The dragon had fallen, the lich was crawling on the ground, and the serpent. 3 hooks latched onto the rim of the core worm's eye socket, and pulled the beast from the sky. They had managed to damage and destroy several of the serpent's hover pads, crippling its speed and maneuverability in the sky. Especially Strix with its well-timed attacks forced the undead to lower its altitude just before finally catching its skull with the scale staff. "You have been weighed," the automaton exclaimed, and the chain hooks dislodged with a loud chink, as the massive beast was slammed in the ground. Using the momentum of the move, the horseman jumped off the back of his black stag and landed on the undead sea serpent only moments after and crashed in the ground. Ramming the hook at the back of the weapon in the base of the skull, he continued the attack for the first time. Tatzel was able to witness the horseman's skill up close. With eyes close to those of a dragon, the Imuji could see the mana of the surrounding being sucked into Strix. During that, the weapon worked like a siphon to steal the core worm's mana directly and funnel it into the golem. But not just his mana, Tatzel could feel that even life force and other stats were mixed into the flow of power. Not even the dragon fall happening right beside them could stop the night golem from devouring the undead's power, no matter what kind of power it was. It felt like an eternity, as Tatzel watched huge amount of energy leave the rotten skeleton and vanish in Strix, like the automaton was a bottomless sea. "You have been measured," the horseman said slowly, after finally releasing the hook from the base of the skull. The tone was even calmer than the usual emotionless golem voice, as Strix leapt off the motionless carcass. Dyromold was still alive, but the beast lacked the energy to even flinch. "And you have been found, wanting," hunger gave its final verdict, once again leaving the enemy behind, depleted but not dead. The empty eye holes of the helmet looked at the dragon who had plummeted to the ground, but the horseman didn't move as if it knew that this was not his opponent. Tatzel suddenly felt the power of legends flow into him. He knew this power. For him, who was born with the potential to reach the legendary status by simply growing, this resource naturally grew within him just like mana. Now, a massive wave swept into his body, forcefully filling him and increasing the concentration of the power in his body. It was a greatly rejuvenating experience after the long morning full of battle. He was immersed in absorbing the power when his focus was interrupted by a notification. Ding! You have helped in defeating the mighty legend of Dyromold, the undead core worm. +5 level of existence. +3000000 P power of existence. So this was how it was, a system reward. Despite only playing a support in this fight, Puffles was notified that the power he absorbed increased his level of existence automatically, while also giving him 3 million points of PoE. Although he had not done it often, he was able to use this power to strengthen his magic attacks, which was quite handy, depending on the situation. Ding! You have reached level of existence 80. You are facing a wall. Power of existence will no longer suffice to increase your level. Special means are needed to overcome the hurdle. Before he could check his current level, another notification popped up. The Imuji's eyes widened. He had been level 177 before, which meant that he actually only received 3 of his 5 bonus levels, before hitting that wall. Would he be reimbursed if he had the special means? What special means did he need though? His eyes focused on Dyromold, but he instinctively looked at Kalsmere. The song had finally come to an end. Nadina stared at the ground below. She should have escaped when she saw the old man. Even if it wasn't that frightening figure that ruined everything. Had she run at that time, she may have lost her dignity, but still would have had several legends and an army under her. Now? Not much of the army of undead was left, with the rampage on the ground. The remnants were still locked in battle with the local zombies or had deserted to the other side. Her legends had all fallen. Uzrock was missing in action. Fuf was stolen from her. Piotr was struggling as his very existence was slowly dissolving. Dyromold was incapacitated and Kalsmere, she was currently witnessing the crippled skeleton dragon struggling in a fight against the Colossus, and 2 horsemen of the apocalypse. Her heart broke, seeing them shatter his bones with the magic Conquest was using, while her only bound legend was merely able to fight like a beast to fend them off. Though was full of rage just a moment ago, but now it was pushed aside by regret. It was all because her skill level was too low. If Kalsmere had retained even a fraction of his intelligent form when he was alive, there would have been no way for them to lose like this. If only her skill level had been higher when she bonded with the skeleton dragon. Her belief was not unfounded. Nadina's gaze fell on Dyromold, remembering how hard it was to kill the core worm, which had rivaled the ancient dragon in life. It had taken the skeleton dragon, the hydra, the orc, and the elder lich to take down the core worm, and now? Her skill was still too low to retain much of its original power, explaining its pitiful state. In the end, it was all her fault. If only she had spent more time on improving her skills. If only she had made better decisions. If only she didn't hold such a grudge. If only she had not come to earth upon hearing he was here. However, when her gaze fell on the bard who had just ended his song, her thoughts changed. How was he so strong? How had this worm managed to gather such an army? If only he wasn't here. Her fault? No, it was his. Right, it was all the bard's fault. She wouldn't lose lying down. No, at the very least she would take him with her. Fueled by her own denial and rage, the Chosen of Kali broke out in purple fire. 8 arms wielding 8 legendary artifacts, she charged at the bard, riding wheels of flames.